What working was like 50 years ago in America is something that is hard to fully put into words now, because life itself felt heavier, steadier, and more grounded back then. Work wasn't designed to make you feel special or constantly motivated, but it gave structure to your days and direction to your life. You woke up early, often before the sun had fully risen, not because you wanted to, but because that's what adults did, that's what responsible people did. The morning air was quiet, radios murmured the news or country music in the background, coffee brewed strong, and there was a strange comfort in knowing exactly what the day would bring. You pulled on the same work clothes you'd worn hundreds of times before, clothes that carried the faint smells of oil, dust, paper, metal, or gasoline, and you headed out the door, knowing where you belonged for the next 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours. Men went to factories, steel mills, auto plants, warehouses, shipyards, rail yards, and assembly lines where machines roared, floors vibrated, and the work never really stopped. You stood in the same place every day, ran the same machine, lifted the same parts, learned to read the sounds of the equipment like a language. Women filled offices, schools, hospitals, banks, and stores, typing on heavy typewriters that shook the desks, filing papers by hand, answering phones that rang endlessly but never followed them home. Secretaries knew everything, clerks knew everyone, and teachers carried stacks of papers home without ever calling it burnout. Construction crews gathered before dawn with metal thermoses in their hands, joking about the cold, the heat, or the aches they pretended didn't bother them, loading tools into trucks that rattled and coughed their way to the job site. Gas station attendants pumped gas themselves, checked oil, cleaned windshields, and talked to customers they'd seen for years. Grocery stores smelled of paper bags and produce, and baggers knew exactly how to stack cans so nothing got crushed. Delivery drivers followed the same routes every single day, waved to the same houses, watched kids grow up from behind the wheel. There were welders, machinists, carpenters, dock workers, truckers, postal workers, janitors, phone operators, warehouse hands, factory line workers, and shop employees who expected to spend decades, sometimes their entire lives, in the same building. You didn't talk about finding your passion or reinventing yourself. You talked about getting a job, keeping a job, and doing it well enough to be proud of yourself at the end of the day. Respect wasn't automatic. You earned it slowly by showing up early, not complaining too much, helping the new guy, and doing your part even when no one was watching. The boss wasn't a faceless name on a screen. He walked the floor, knew your name, noticed if you were reliable. A simple nod, a firm handshake, or a quiet word of approval meant something real. When someone asked what you did for a living, you answered clearly and confidently, because your job wasn't just a way to make money. It was an anchor, a routine, and a piece of who you were in a world that still felt solid enough to stand on.
What really defined working 50 years ago in America wasn't just the place you went every morning, but how work fit naturally into the rest of your life, almost like a steady rhythm everyone shared without ever talking about it. The workday had a clear beginning and a clear ending, and that separation mattered more than people realize today. You clocked in at the same time every morning, nodded to the same faces, settled into your spot, and got to work without much ceremony. When quitting time came, whether it was marked by a whistle, a bell, or the clock on the wall, it meant something real. You shut things down, cleaned up, hung your jacket on the same hook, and left work behind without guilt. There were no calls during dinner, no messages interrupting the evening news, no sense that you should still be thinking about the job once you were home. Work stayed in its place. Many jobs were physical, and by the end of the day, your body carried the proof of it. Your hands were rough, your muscles sore, your clothes smelled like the place you'd spent all day in, but there was a deep satisfaction in that exhaustion. It was an honest tired, the kind that came from standing on your feet all day, lifting, fixing, building, serving, or repeating the same motions until they became second nature. You sat down to dinner knowing you had earned it. Coworkers slowly became part of your life in a way that feels rare now. You didn't just recognize them, you knew them. You knew who packed the same lunch every day, who talked nonstop, who worked quietly, who always showed up early, and who everyone relied on when things went wrong. Break rooms were small gathering places filled with folding chairs, Buzzing vending machines, strong coffee, cigarette smoke drifting in from just outside the door, and conversations that drifted from baseball scores to gas prices to neighborhood gossip. The same radios played the same stations every day, and eventually the music blended into the sound of work itself. There were unwritten rules you learned over time. Don't complain too much, don't embarrass your coworkers, pull your weight, and help the new guy figure things out. Even when the job was repetitive or dull, you understood that your role mattered. If you didn't show up, something would slow down, stop working, or fall on someone else's shoulders. One paycheck could support a household, sometimes a large family, and while money was rarely abundant, it was steady. You paid your bills, put food on the table, fixed things instead of replacing them, and planned your life knowing roughly what next month would look like. That predictability brought peace. It allowed families to plan, children to feel safe, and weekends to feel like real rest. Saturday meant errands and small pleasures, Sunday meant slowing down, and Monday always came back around, steady and familiar, ready to restart a rhythm that, for better or worse, made life feel anchored. When people look back on working 50 years ago in America, what often rises to the surface isn't just the jobs themselves, but how deeply work shaped identity, family, and the way life felt as a whole. Your job wasn't something you questioned every morning or talked about endlessly. It was simply part of who you were. It gave structure to your week, purpose to your mornings, and a sense of direction that quietly carried you forward year after year. Kids knew when their parents would be home just by looking at the clock. Dinner happened at the same time, evenings followed familiar routines. Weekends felt earned, not rushed, and retirement wasn't an abstract idea. It was a milestone you could picture, something older coworkers talked about with both anticipation and pride. People marked time by years on the job, not by career changes. 10 years meant something, 20 years meant something even more. Work didn't promise happiness, but it offered dignity, and that counted for a lot. You complained sometimes, of course. Everyone did, but complaining didn't mean quitting. It meant you cared enough to notice what was wrong. Looking back now, many people can still remember their first job like it happened yesterday. The nervousness of the first day, the smell of the building, the sound of the machines or phones or footsteps in the hallway. The older workers who showed you the ropes, sometimes gently, sometimes not, but always with the expectation that you'd figure it out and pull your weight. Those memories stick because they marked the moment you stepped into adulthood, when life stopped being theoretical and started being real. And maybe that's what feels so different today. Work back then wasn't perfect, but it felt grounded, understandable, human. You knew where you stood, you knew what was expected of you. And at the end of the day, when you sat down, loosened your shoes, and rested your tired body, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing you had done your part. For many listening now, those years are long gone, but they're not forgotten. They live on in muscle memory, in old stories, in the way you still judge a day by whether something useful got done. Work 50 years ago wasn't about chasing meaning, it quietly gave you some, and for a lot of people, that's a feeling that never really leaves.